Hey neighbors, the handyman here with Initiative Coffee Company. The Bill Allen here with the Bill Allen. Don't you dare hit that snooze button again. It's time to rise and roll.
All right, people, we are back. If you're watching this live on Twitch with us, we invite you to join the chat room because today is going to be a montage.
We also invite you to accept our apologies for being 23 minutes late on our start time today. The changed start time caught us by surprise.
That's right. I have not had very good luck recently, Brian, with allergies.
I can tell.
My eyes are watering
allergenic.
And tired. My nose is stuffed up. I'm kind of leaky. So, but we're going to truck through
adjective
this.
For people.
Kind of leaky.
Kind of leaky.
So, Brian, we have a lot to talk about on the show today because
we do.
And I'm not sure where to start, so I'm just going to start with one of the big questions.
Yes.
That we've gotten a lot between our different channels, and that is, if you're someone new to the world of gaming, we get this a lot. How do I join a group? I'd really like to play D&D, but I don't know where to find a group. How do I find a group to play with? How do I get started playing?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. So there's a few solutions to this. We've talked about it a few times on this show. If you're local to the Chicago area, you're always welcome at some Initiative Coffee Company programming. We run every Monday at some libraries in the western suburbs. We run the first and third Saturdays at Hillgrove Tap in Western Springs. And the way that we can engage that is through some web apps, particularly Meetup and some other things, which I guess takes us to our first solution to that problem, is web apps like Meetup.
Yes. So, because a lot of people would start maybe local. Mm-hmm. Let's start global, and then we'll work our way down.
Backwards. Yeah. Bad world building.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Let's build the whole thing. So you mentioned Meetup because it's a tool that you actually use for Initiative Coffee Company with events. Talk a little bit about how Meetup works as a host, and then we'll talk about how a newbie could join your events or search for other events.
So as a host, we have a corporate account, so we have like the lower tier, so we can schedule up to I think 4 different meetups that meet however frequently we want to meet. People sign up for it, they RSVP. It's a little bit like online dating where people say they're going to come and then maybe they show up and probably they don't, but I mean that's kind of the nature of the ephemeral world we live in here with the internet. But
sorry for blowing out your
speakers.
Your speakers, people.
But if you are looking to join a group, it's pretty easy. You can get a free membership.
Yes.
I don't think you can maybe host only one event instead of like more than one.
Okay.
But if any, you can get a free membership and sign up at tables. It's the way a lot of like friendly local game stores do it, but not necessarily all of them. Yeah, I know there's a lot of groups in the Chicago suburbs. There's Chums of Chance out near like Naperville and Aurora. There's the Downers Grove meetup group. There's one downtown. There's one up north.
So, and the thing with Meetup is you identify kind of where you live, and then they find into. Yeah. So I mean, we're in the Chicago area, so I see just a ridiculous amount of options, and there's literally people playing first edition D&D, second edition, 3.5, 5th,
Prospect, Elmhurst.
Yeah. Now, so I think one thing that we have to remember is that sometimes people who are looking to join a group or start a group are from maybe less populated areas, rural communities,
or more remote locations.
Yeah. In that case, if let's say there's nothing in their area.
Well, fortunately, we live in the world of the internet.
Yes.
And there are some web apps that help that way too. You can jump into Roll20, you can jump into Fantasy Grounds, and they both have like campaign search features in them. I don't know much about either of those because we don't do a lot of like internet-based gaming yet.
Yes.
But I do know that you can like look up a game and join a game via Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds, even if you don't know the people.
So here's another one that I actually didn't think of because I don't use it a lot, but a huge chunk of the world does, which is Reddit. So a lot of people go to the communities area on Reddit, and they will post that there's a group open, or they'll post that they're looking for a group. And a lot of people have said that, like, so here I'm looking at RPG. There's 47,000 people on this subreddit, and there are 200 currently looking for groups. So
there's
that might be
people ready to play with you right there.
Right. That might be another means, whether they're local to you or you end up connecting via like Google Hangout.
And if
or
you're not,
Skype.
If you're looking for a kind of different experience in tabletop as well, I'm sure Reddit is a host of several West Marches style games.
Yeah.
And West Marches is kind of, it's a little bit like a text-based adventure, where like a group of people just kind of get together and decide they're going to go on an event. Like there'll be maybe 40 people in the campaign,
right?
And a group of them will decide to go on a quest, and like it's through email or messaging. And if you want more information on that, I know Matt Colville has a really good video on West Marches style campaigns. He knows a lot more about it than I do because I've never done it, but he has. So you should check that out. If you're on the YouTube, maybe we'll link to that in the thing below.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one other thing too that I heard somebody talk about was Craigslist. And so I went to community in Craigslist and I searched, and there's actually legitimately one person looking for group for D&D
for
campaign.
D&D, but if you look up Dungeons and Dragons, that might show up more. If you look up 5th edition, that might show up more.
And I guess I don't know why am I listed in California?
That's the trouble with all of these search features. Meetup, Craigslist, probably not so much Reddit because you're already on a subreddit, but there's so many different codes to look for when you're looking for gaming that you might miss a good number of potential games because you don't have the right search code in, right?
Okay.
You don't have like 5th edition in, or you don't have D&D in, or you don't have Dungeons and Dragons, or you don't have D&D instead of D&D. So that's the kind of one of the things that if you're looking for a group and having trouble, keep those search terms in mind and really focus on what you're looking for.
So here's an example. I'm searching
hello,
on
Latia
Craigslist.
and Danny both.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us.
I'm searching on Craigslist, in the Chicago Craigslist. I found 3 results for D&D. I'm searching Dungeons and Dragons.
No results.
3 results, but different. 2 the same, 1 different.
Sure.
So
some of these go as far as like Milwaukee, but
right, which might be a hike.
So
I think it's interesting that there's kind of a mix of results there, but it seems like Meetup and Reddit and
then there's Facebook groups too.
And Facebook groups.
And then the other thing is Wizards of the Coast has a pretty robust WPN membership. I don't know what the WPN stands for. Something Player Network. Wizards Players Network?
Maybe.
But any registered friendly local game stores that are running content,
Wizards Play Network.
Can post their events through WPN. We can't because sadly our lack of brick and mortar makes us a redheaded stepchild of the gaming community.
That kind of sucks.
A little bit. Maybe I'll talk to Tito today about that.
Yeah. So here's another thing too. I just logged into the Wizards Play Network, and there are just a ridiculous amount of events. So that's yet another resource.
Right.
So let's talk. So we've talked about Reddit, we've talked about Meetup, even Craigslist, Facebook groups, the WPN Wizards Play Network, all of which are ways to find groups. Now, just locally, without any interwebs,
yes,
what are
Danny,
some...
be careful with Craigslist. It can be a scary, scary place. Sorry.
Yes. What are some local things? So, for example,
Sure.
when I was growing up, you went to the friendly local game store
Sure.
or hobby store or comic store, and you looked at their cork board for people posting groups, or you posted your own.
And I think largely that's still the case, right? Most friendly local game stores have some sort of play that they're doing.
Yeah.
Some kind of shy away from it because they don't have the space or they don't want to necessarily deal with like loiterers, I guess.
Yes.
I don't know why you'd consider that loitering, but that said, most gaming stores have some sort of tabletop focus where you can come in, and sometimes it's just Adventures League, where they'll run it 1 or 2 days a week. I can think of 4 off the top of my head in the Chicago area here, you know.
Right.
But a lot of libraries are starting to do more programming.
Yeah, talk a little bit about. So I'm going to go blow my nose because congestion. I want you to tell the audience about the initiative programs that you
Sure.
have and how you have kind of connected with youth, families, but also adults, and what the differences are between the library programs
Sure.
that are for all ages and the evening Saturday
Right.
programs for adults.
So the library programs are doing pretty much every Monday. We're running at the LaGrange Public Library, and that is an all ages program that focuses on just getting people into the game. So we run Adventures League there, and we focus on mostly hardbook adventures, just because they're a little bit more consistent in their writing in terms of editing and everything else. But we do run some modules as well. And then in addition to that, we run, I run a youth program here at the high school on Friday nights that over the summer we were doing on Saturdays at the Western Springs Public Library. And then we run a Saturday night program at Hillgrove Tap. So the difference is being that the Friday night program is just for high school students here at the high school. The Saturday program that was that offshoot of the Friday program was for junior high and high school students through the library. The Monday program is an all ages program, and the Saturday night program is an adults program. And the reason that we break that up and focus on different types of play is because the hobby has never been easier to get into. And so there's a lot of opportunity for not only youth who haven't experienced D&D or have kind of been ancillary to D&D or adjacent to D&D, but also to adults who maybe missed the hobby growing up or played first or second edition and haven't played in a while. And a lot of times those two groups don't necessarily want to overlap, right? Particularly there's a concern about like adults playing at the kids table kind of mentality. Oftentimes teenagers can be petulant and delightfully so in a D&D campaign, but maybe that kind of gets things sidetracked a bit. But as long as the whole table agrees, that's probably fine, you know. That said, we also believe that teenagers being petulant teenagers while playing D&D aren't going to fix that behavior unless they're playing with skilled adult players or skilled other youth players. But if they just like play with each other and just kind of like irritate each other, escalate each other's nonsense, delightful nonsense, but nonsense, they never learn better skills on sharing spotlight and sharing the table and making sure that everybody gets a chance.
And it's funny that sometimes the mix in ages and all that kind of stuff works. Sometimes it as you mentioned, can be, you know, people can be annoyed.
Sure.
So the fact is that there are options, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you are one of the people who are like Brian said, maybe you used to play and you haven't played in a while and you'd like to get back into it, or you've never played before and you just want to join a group so that you can learn by playing.
Yeah. I know we keep harping on this, but that's really the biggest benefit of Adventures League, is to learn kind of the mechanics and really get a good understanding of the system so that you can decide whether it's worth investing in.
Right.
And that's probably its strongest feature. And I know that there are people who like only do Adventures League And that goes back to those people in more rural and remote locations where like maybe they don't have the schedule that allows them to get to a campaign every week, or they don't have the transportation every week. Well, Adventures League helps because it's a drop-in, drop-out system, and like you just plug your character in, and it's a way to the races, you know.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the positive note here is that the short answer to that question of how do I get involved in D&D, or how do I play, or how do I find a group, is that
however you want.
However you want. There are a ton of options.
Yeah,
and just I think the whole point of discussing this on today's episode is that there are a lot of options. No, you know, and many factors exist: where you live, availability of local groups, so that you could sit at a table with people, whether that's through Adventures League or your local library or comic book store, game store, hobby store.
If you're a high school student, like I'm sure that there's either a game going at your high school, or you could start one.
Yeah. Like, there are church groups or churches that will host gaming nights. Yeah. So I think it a lot of ways depends on where you live and the availability of the local game.
And that's not just for D&D either. That's for most role-playing games.
Right.
Like you'll be able to track down role-playing games in general kind of just by doing a little bit of homework, I think. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously some of the resources are going to dry up. If it's not a Wizards product, they're probably not posting it on WPN. But
right. But check all those things.
Right.
Bottom line is if people want to find out how to get involved in a group, look locally, look online with tools like Meetup, Reddit, Facebook groups, even Craigslist. Be wise about your decision making. You know, if you're going to an event for the first time and you don't know any of the people,
maybe take somebody with you.
Maybe take a friend with you. Yeah. But also, I mean, the groups probably are going to meet up at a public-ish place.
Right.
So, you know, if you're a little concerned because, you know, you're invited to play a game and it's at someone's house and you don't know those people, maybe ask if you like, hey, can we meet up for coffee first so you can kind of tell me about your game a little more and we can meet in person before I come to your house.
I would say most people running a game, especially if it's like homebrew content, are excited to talk about their homebrew content.
Yeah.
So you're not going to get a lot of resistance on that. And if you do, maybe that's not a game that you want to be a part of anyway.
Right.
Danny brings up a good point. She says if you go on Roll20 and go through the web first, it's a lot safer. You know, if you just want to learn the system that way, you don't have to worry so much about like the safety implications when you're in the safety of your own space.
Right.
So
yeah, exactly. Okay. The next thing is going to be a little project that I kind of am surprising Brian with, and that project is the discussion of monsters. So every edition of D&D, going back to the earliest editions, had various kinds of books for monsters, whether that's Monster Manual, you know, Monster Manual 2, Monster Manual 3, Fiend Folio, all those things. Or in 5th edition, Monster Manual, Volo's Guide to Monsters.
They're taking a different approach in 5th edition, which I'm excited to see.
Yeah.
It's a lot more narrative focused.
Some of the I mean, and this is a broad topic, we're only going to scratch the surface here, but, you know, with every edition, they put out some kind of monster books. So, you know, here we have the Monster Manual, and then we have Volo's Guide to Monsters, which expands more. But
Mordenkainen came out last year.
Right. So, and what you get typically,
Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes.
Yeah, it's a encyclopedia of monsters, right? So you get a description of the monster, you get a stat block,
Some
picture.
of them, like Volo's Guide is nice because some of the stuff in here, there's 3 or 4 that have like a whole chapter,
right,
that go over like the culture of these monsters.
Yes, and that's what I kind of wanted to discuss today. So older game editions were really just very simplistic. Like you'd maybe get an illustration, you'd get the stat blocks, you know, the numbers, and
a description,
a 2-paragraph description.
And you're talking about 1st and 2nd edition.
Yeah.
In 3rd edition, they kind of opened it up a little bit and started talking about like culture in specific monsters. I know that like the demon section and the devil section had like descriptions of like a basic understanding of like the abyss and the 9 hells.
Yeah.
And then obviously the Dungeon Master's Guide had a better explanation of that. Similar to like dragons had a full section. in 3rd edition, and then eventually the Draconomicon came out, where they had a big like foray into dragon culture.
Right. And I think, is it pretty factually accurate to say that 4th edition had the largest volume of published hardcover books?
No, I
Or do you think 3rd?
I didn't play 4th more than like twice.
Okay.
And it was like a dark time in gaming for me. Not because of 4th edition, just because I was in a city where I didn't know people who played.
Right. Speaking of connecting.
Speaking of connecting, yeah, that was before a lot of these some of these resources were around, and I was busy with grad school. But I would be hard pressed to believe that anybody was competing in terms of like number of books with 3rd edition. They put out 3 books a month for
years,
7-8 years. Like,
so between 3 and 3.5, probably the most published hardcover books. Now,
it could be 4th. Like I said, I wasn't keeping up with it.
Right.
And I know there were a lot of books, but it was a shorter edition.
Right.
So I can't imagine.
So I guess my reason for bringing that up is, have we seen what changes have we seen in the evolution? To me, just looking historically, like if I were to compare the first edition AD&D Monster Manual to this, I mean, number one, production quality, right? You've got like color, you've got like these amazing illustrations. You get the stat block, but you also get like longer descriptions.
I think that's books in general.
Books in general,
like the late 70s. Though,
but you also have things like Volo's Guide, where you get more monsters, but you also get just expanded information, like you said, about some of the monsters listed
for
in
select
the Monster
monsters,
Manual. For select things, and I think that's a big marker. That's a big difference, because in a way, Volo's Guide to Monsters is not just another monster manual with new monsters.
Right.
It's really an opportunity for DMs to explore, to go deeper into some of the more common monsters or uncommon monsters, and really get a better sense of how to integrate them. So in other words, it's not just monsters, It's not just a deck where you pull a monster out at random. It's really more thinking deeply about monsters, how to integrate them into your campaign world. And that's the part I like, because it's something that I did before these things were.
And the other
there.
benefits of Volo's Guide is 5th edition came out with the expectation that everything in the books was a guideline.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they fully expect DMs to like ignore stuff or change stuff. And Volo's Guide is nice because even though it has these like robust cultural sections within these about these monsters, and Mordenkainen is similar, it gives you not only some information that Wizards thinks about these monsters, but it gives you the things to think about if you're not going to use that information, right? Like if you're not going to take the canon approach, the Faerun approach to all of these monsters.
Yeah.
Maybe a water elemental exists differently in your setting than Faerun. I know they do in mine.
Right.
It gives you the things to think about in terms of like, what are the cultural implications of monstrous races?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And that, I think, which you touched on is, how does this function within published worlds that the company provides, but also how can you think about employing it in your own world, or how does it differ?
And I think that's the heart and soul of 5th edition too, is you're comparing to 1st edition where everything was very much like still wargaming mentality,
right?
Where you could roll, if you had a 100-page monster manual, you could roll percentile dice to decide what monster's there.
Yeah.
Versus a much more narrative-focused 5th edition. And I think that's where a lot of like pushback is coming from in terms of the old school gamers, but also where like a lot of the vibrance and growth in the community is happening. Right?
And I completely agree, because I think part of what has always been, look, I grew up playing the old school method where like you'd be in a dungeon and one room would have goblins and the next room would have some ridiculous thing, and we didn't care. We just would like roll dice and kill it, you know. But as I got older and my gaming style matured and my narrative senses matured, as a DM, well, first of all, as a player, I appreciated when monsters made sense. In other words, like, if we were in this
Why is
setting,
there a unicorn in the room next to the
right,
demon?
Right. And of course, some DMs would always have some hokey half-ass excuse like, well, the wizard created random
It's a menagerie.
rooms. Yeah, like that's cool for like one run.
Right.
But I feel like as I got older, I wanted monsters to make sense and to be the choices for what was stocked in these encounters to be organic to the storyline, to the narrative, to the setting. So,
but I will say that 5th edition, like in 1st edition, I don't know that there was a narrative.
No.
Right? When you were playing 1st and 2nd, and even when I was playing 3rd to some degree, there wasn't an expectation that we were playing with a narrative. We were just sitting together and hucking dice.
Right.
It was ROLL playing instead of ROLE playing.
Yes.
And it makes a difference. 5th edition is a very narrative-focused system based off the wishes of the publishers.
Yes.
Right? And if you want to play tank and spank monsters, you can do that, but it's not the end-all be-all of role-playing.
Right. And I think, and here's something that maybe we collectively can explore, and it's a good segue, but in a perfect world, Brian, you'd have a group. Everybody would have their group, and the chemistry would be right. Yeah. Everybody would respect each other at the table, and it would all be about interactive storytelling.
Sure.
And the DM would be the only person reading these 3 books. Yeah. And more, right? The only person.
Yeah.
And the players would only read the player's handbook.
Or whatever rules they're using.
Right. Okay. However, that just doesn't happen.
Sure.
Because inevitably, sometimes it's natural because maybe the players share DMing duties, so they have to read these books.
And thank God that it doesn't happen, because if that were the case, no one would be publishing whole systems.
Right.
Because
yes,
if 1/5 of your player base is buying most of the books,
right. So then that brings us to this situation now where players at a table, whether they're rotating through or like in the 80s we called it cheating. Like when people who were players who did not have the chops to DM, just period, like they maybe tried and gave up, and rightly so, they would read these books anyway, in a metagaming kind of way, for the cheats, so that they knew the stat blocks and all that stuff, so that they knew what to do when they were encountered. And I remember as a kid hating that because I felt like it was cheating. Like, hey, you're not the DM, you shouldn't read these things. But also, it just kind of took the surprise element out of it. This brings me to my big question about this whole monster batch and issue. Reskinning monsters. Talk about what you believe that definition is. What does it mean when people say reskin a monster?
So for us, it makes a difference because we're running a company and there are things like copyright to be concerned about, right? So the Beholder and the Illithid are, maybe not the Illithid, but I know the Beholder for sure is a Wizards of the Coast copywritten product, right? And there generally have been pretty cool about people using those monsters in the past. But it's not, I don't want to have to deal with a cease and desist, and I don't expect that they would send me one. But before we started broadcasting content, I specifically emailed Wizards of the Coast and was like, hey, we want to use your rule set. What are the limitations of using your rule set for streaming? And they gave me a document that was like, don't use the art, don't use the titles, don't use the, essentially the trademark characters, right? But in addition to that, if I'm building my own setting, I don't necessarily want it to resemble Forgotten Realms, right? For a couple of reasons. One, because it causes this cheat scenario. And it's not even people who don't DM. You get DMs who have been playing for 4 editions who have an encyclopedic knowledge of the monsters. And it's tough for them not to act on that knowledge, right? But also because I want my setting to look and feel different, right? Some things are going to exist throughout, trolls are always going to be, I mean, maybe, but in my mind, trolls are always going to be vulnerable to fire, right? And for stuff like that, there's a narrative in your system, right? There's a narrative in your setting at your table, And like, if everybody who plays D&D knows that trolls are vulnerable to fire, it might be common knowledge in your setting that trolls are vulnerable to fire. Like, there's myths, there's rumors, there's everything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the things that I do when I reskin monsters is either make adjustments based off the racial benefits. If I'm using like NPC like bandits and things, I'll give them the abilities of the racial abilities of the race they are. So like, if you're going up against a kobold sailor, maybe they'll have the beg, grovel, and cower ability, right? Otherwise, I have a tendency to ignore CRs and just make adjustments. Because I'm much more interested in the monsters being relevant to the location than relevant to the party level. Right?
So let's take an example. You're on the beaches of one of the islands on the glass shores in your original world, and you want to have an encounter for the party who's just, gotten off of a longboat and has hit the beach. There's a jungle. What's a monster, a common enough monster from the monster manual that you could reskin, rename, add stats to, or whatever to make that so that the players don't necessarily know what that is? So that you avoid the meta.
That's tough, If it's a low-level party, I'm not dealing with monsters. I'm dealing with beasts. And those beasts,
Okay.
if it's a cat, it's a cat. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
there's no reason why they wouldn't know what a tiger is.
Right. Say mid or higher.
If it's a mid or higher level party, I might describe the beast in an unconventional way.
Okay.
Or describe the monster in an unconventional way. Or just kind of like, I did this for the pilot of Bard's Tale, right? We had I think I used the stat block for like a gibbering mouther.
Okay.
For like the viscous or like oozy thing that landed on the boat.
Right.
Right.
Right. So we see this
Right.
oozy blob thing land.
Right. So it still has most of the abilities of the gibbering mouther. I might change it from like slashing or piercing or whatever the teeth damage is to like bludgeoning damage because it's like a pseudopod appendage thing instead. But largely, you can just like literally reskin it, right? The gibbering mouther is a mass of teeth. Like this was a mass of like essentially elemental water runoff, right? So that's like one example, and then I guess I'm trying to think if it's come up again in the Bard's Tale.
Well,
Off the
I'll
top
give
of
you
my
an
head, I
example.
can't
Say,
remember.
like, I think most players and DMs that run into like low-level creatures, like goblins, orcs,
And that's most tables.
kobolds, right? Like, at a certain point, even if you're not going for the metagaming or you're not going for the cheat, you're gonna get the basic
Right.
CR rating. You're gonna know what their hit points are, roughly what their AC should be. And my tip when I try to answer this question of like how do you keep it interesting and keep the players on their toes, when I'm looking at reskinning, I might just do little things like you said, like I give them a buff in AC, or I give them 15 more hit points, or sometimes with undead, like people feel like undead are so predictable, right? So maybe
Maybe the zombies aren't mindless.
maybe the zombies aren't mindless, or maybe they're for whatever reason they're imbued with some demonic power that gives them an insane speed,
Right.
So
Or they have a hive mind and
right,
they
hive
operate as
mind,
a single unit.
Yeah. So like there are ways to take the monsters without even reskinning them,
Right.
but just giving them certain attributes to make it more of a surprise, so
Yeah,
that when the
I think
party
those
goes, oh
adjustments
look,
are valid.
there's 6 zombies
Right.
shambling toward us, but when they get within 20 feet of you, all of a sudden their dexterity triples, their AC goes through the roof, and they get 20 more hit points.
Yeah, so recently the bards in the Bard's Tale and the cook fought a water elemental on a boat.
Yes.
And that water elemental, and the party was a 5th level party, and that water elemental was a CR 7 or 8. And there were also 2 methods involved, and that came from a lack of expectation that you would harvest water elemental goo.
Yeah.
But that's what you did, right? And if you want to see this in detail, check out the Bard's Tale.
Yeah.
But for the water elemental, like it has this ability where like if it absorbs you or moves through your square, it like beats you with concussive water force, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's supposed to recharge on a 5 or a 6, similar to like a dragon's breath or something else. But I don't see that as logical, right? Like I don't know, like it doesn't make sense for me that like being inside this thing only hurts you when it can roll a 5 or a 6, right?
Right.
So instead, I made adjustments where like I cut the hit points in half and made it so like anytime someone didn't have a swim speed and like went through it, they took this damage.
Yeah.
Right. And those small adjustments, I think, are enough. I mean, it was enough for Chris to question it at the table, right?
Yeah.
And so I think those small adjustments, if you establish as a DM the willingness to adjust monsters either on the fly or in advance, the expectation that players know those monsters goes away very quickly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if every time your players encounter something, they expect that they know how it works and then they don't, that's gonna change their opinion on whether or not they know how it works.
Yeah.
Right? So it's the same thing with red caps, right? Like more recently, you encountered some red caps, and in D&D, they don't like eat people whole, but in other genres, i.e., like White Wolf and Celtic mythology, they are endless, bottomless voids of space that they shove food into, whatever they want into, right? So the notion of like, oh, they're garbage disposals, essentially, lends itself to changing the monsters a little, right?
And it narrative wise can be fun for the players because now, at least the open-minded players, because now you don't know, and there's that element of surprise, which is a renewal. You know, if you're an old player who's got all this stuff memorized, it can be predictable. And I think what's cool is when the DM takes the time to either reskin or just adjust the monsters on the fly, or even pre-planned and describe them in a different way and how they function in a different way. It can be exhilarating as an experience for veteran
this is the thing
players.
I've never seen before, right?
And it's also, I think too, like even the ones that are influenced by real cultural or mythological significance, like that's the kind of thing where we expect one thing and then we see another. We expect trolls to be vulnerable to fire. Well, what if you find out that
lightning?
What if you find out that this specific island troll is only vulnerable to poison?
Yeah.
And those kind of little tweaks could be significant. All right, another thing that I wanted to ask you about is conditions. So if a monster can induce an effect, maybe it doesn't have this naturally, but you add this, right? So that it doesn't become, because here's one thing I want to caution DMs about, is not to create a goblin that's 15th level and can destroy. I mean, if it's part of your narrative, that's one thing. But like, don't just reskin a monster and give like a goblin dragon breath or whatever. But like, try to think of how it could work organically. So maybe there's a way where some ability that they have to do damage isn't so much doing 10d12 damage, but more like it does a condition. If you fail a con save, you get something.
That's a way to liven up the game also. And a lot of times
conditions are overlooked, Brian. Talk about
conditions.
There's
a lot of things that are overlooked. Conditions are overlooked. Weather is overloed.
Yeah.
Environmental
how
hazards
can a DM
overlooked.
though, when you're
Terrain
looking
is
at this whole
overlooked.
monster thing, how can a DM better use conditions so that you're not just TPKing, you're not killing a party, you're just making life more challenging?
Sure. And I think that's a good thing to look at because the least exciting thing you can do to a party is kill it.
Yeah.
Like even if like you want to like make it evident that there are stakes and there are consequences, conditions are a much better way to do that.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with giving. Part of that is give them character levels, right? Like if a goblin commoner is also a third level fighter, right? Like, and this was easier in older editions. Like there would be tables for like advancing characters in the Dungeon Master's Guide, right?
Yeah.
Like either giving it more hit dice, giving it character levels. I remember having like a gatehouse that was actually a mimic, right? Like a whole gatehouse instead of a chest, right? And that's just by advancing monsters, and there were charts for that. But I don't think it's gone by the wayside because it's still very possible.
Yeah.
You know, like I think like giving things the ability to do poison damage or giving things like a crippling ability. Like the Dungeon Master's Guide has a lot of opportunity and a lot of its optional rule sets, but it has a lot of opportunity to explore other situations.
Yeah.
Right? Whether it's the madness tables, whether it's lingering conditions, whether it's poisons, whatever. I think when you make a character have to struggle, or when a character is using one ability as their go-to, and like the Warlock's Eldritch Blast comes to mind immediately, right?
Yep.
Like if all of a sudden something's immune to force damage, it makes the Warlock have to get creative.
Yeah.
And unfortunately in the situation with the Warlock, it kind of limits their abilities. But that's why you don't do it every time. Like every aspect of combat and every aspect of the game is not focused on the same character, right?
Good point, because as general reminder to experienced and new DMs and groups, these games are not adversarial.
Sure.
It's not DM versus players. Right. And the people who play that way, I'm sorry, they're wrong. Fight me. I've been doing this for 40 years. If that's how you play, like, it's not going to last long.
It's not going to last long. And like maybe you have a group of players who want to play that way, and that's fine.
Right.
But it's not going to be compelling. Like it's not something I'm interested in.
Right.
Let me put it that way.
And I think the other thing too is that the whole reason I brought that up is because I feel like there's a dynamic sometimes where DMs maybe misunderstand how to challenge the players, how to challenge the group, versus just I will defeat them, right? So if using your Warlock analogy, if I'm a player at a table, and once in a while, you create some encounter where my Eldritch Blast isn't going to cut it. That's fine, because it does challenge me to be more creative and to think of what I can do with my other spells or abilities to help the group out, maybe instead of being a blaster. But if you do that every time,
every combat,
you basically
lose that player.
You cock block my Force Blast, like that player as that player, I'm going to be pissed. I'm going to be resentful, and I will eventually quit, or I'll just kill this character and make a new one.
Danny, I'm sorry, and I hope there's no children in your store right now.
Well. My point is that I think that it's a careful balancing act. It's a juggling act, whether you're reskinning monsters, character leveling monsters, coming up with different encounters or ways to kind of challenge the players. But the point is that you're keeping it fresh. You're sticking to your narrative, your world, but you're also integrating little things that will keep the players on their toes.
That's the thing, like doing things out of the blue. Even if it's to challenge your players, doing things out of the blue to challenge your players without warning or expectation feels punitive as a player, right? But if there's a narrative example for it, right, it makes it better, right? And I don't want to I'm not on the side of these Star Wars people, but like when there was like a black stormtrooper and everybody was up in arms, like there better be a narrative reason for that, right? Like, I don't necessarily agree with that, but, like, that's the attitude, right? Like, tell me why my thing is the way the thing is. Like, tell me why the thing I'm trying to do doesn't work, right? And if there's a reasonable explanation, typically players are cool with it. Because it shows that you thought about their character. Right? Like, and that, to me, like, if I was a player, I'd be like, oh, you've spent extra time considering my character. That's awesome. I appreciate that. And you've done it in a way that feels organic. Versus, I have a powerful character and you're just trying to shut me down. What is this channel about? This channel is about,
it's about tabletop role-playing games, and we talk about
primarily,
things.
So we run this show, Rise and Roll, and then we do some recording of a show called The Bard's Tale. The Tale of Many Bards. It's 5 bards and a cook that stumble through the glass shores in a homebrew setting.
And I do a whole bunch of stuff on my stuff too.
Yeah.
The Dwarven Forge Master. I'm assuming that you own Dwarven Forge, but
maybe
is
Stefan McCormick in our chat right now?
Yeah. We also use Dwarven Forge products on our gaming tables for our games that we stream. So welcome.
And home
anyway.
Things. Yeah.
So in summary, today's episode has been a wild ride through a variety of different conversations. But I think my goal was just to kind of help either people who are new to the hobby or people who are trying to get back into it to find a community or build your own. And then once you do, some tips for how to keep it alive, how to keep it fresh, how to, whether it's reskinning monsters, that kind of stuff.
And I think the way to do that is just to focus on your table is successful if everybody walks away from the table having had a good time.
Yeah.
Right? If you focus on the narrative and make sure everyone's included, I feel like they're going to have a good time.
True.
And so that's really the biggest tip I can give.
Yeah. So, Brian, to conclude, I want you to wrap up by teasing your conversation that you're going to be having with Greg Tito later, which brings all of this stuff together.
It's true.
Doesn't it? Because it's all about community.
It is, yeah.
I planned it that way.
He planned it that way and didn't tell me. Yeah, so we're going to be, Latia, who plays Lotus on the Bard's Tale, and I are going to be featured guests on Dragon Talk on the D&D Twitch channel today at 3 o'clock Pacific, 5 Central, 6 Eastern. I don't know where you all are. That's a lie. I know where most of you are. So if you want to see us talk about the business, if Dwarven Forge Master, if you really want to know what Initiative Coffee is about, you should check out the D&D Dragon Talk podcast later today on twitch.tv/DND. Or my guess is we will probably be hosting it on this channel as well. So we'll be talking to Greg about Initiative and the big con we have Saturday, where we're running an Epic and still have seats available if you want to play in an Epic Saturday and you're in Chicago, and kind of whatever else he has to
building
ask about.
community,
building communities,
drawing in people of all ages,
youth programming and everything else.
So that'll be exciting. So make sure you guys tune in. And if you're watching this on the replay on the YouTube channel,
you missed it, but you can watch it on the replay too.
Yeah, but make sure that you you click on the subscribe button and click that little notifications bell so that you can get updates on all the Initiative Coffee Company content.
If you're live on Twitch right now, make sure you click that follow heart thing.
Yes, that would be great.
And if you like what we do, check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/Initiative Coffee Co. There's a few tiers there that some of them are real cheap that you can support us in getting more programming like this off the ground and like paying our crew.
That's right. And make sure that you aside from just subscribing and following and stuff, if you have questions, if you have questions or comments, make sure to drop us a note, comment in the chat if you're live, or comment if you're watching the replay on YouTube. Ask questions.
We try to respond to most comments right now. Hopefully we'll get to a point someday where that's not a viable option, but right now there's enough of me and enough comments that I can get to all of them.
And who knows, maybe if it's a really fascinating topic, we'll make it one of the segments.
Episode of it,
yeah. So, all right, cool. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you next week on Rise and Roll.
Probably around 9 o'clock. Hey neighbors, thanks for watching our video. Make sure you check out our other videos here and here. Make sure you subscribe down there and get the notifications from the bell
up there. See you next time.